I was called just the maid, and just one document changed everything. Before we get into the story, tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your honest review. For 30 years, I cleaned their floors, polished their silver, and folded their secrets into linen drawers. To them, I was invisible. They called me just the maid. But that was before the funeral, before the will, and before everything changed with a single document. My name is Elena Cruz, and this is how I inherited the estate that everyone thought would never be mine. It started with death. Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne, the woman I had served since I was 22, had passed away quietly in her sleep, wrapped in the same ivory sheets I had ironed just the day before. Her children returned for the funeral. Not out of grief, no. Grief requires love. They returned like vultures, circling a carcass. I stood in the hallway that day, wearing black, head down, blending into the wallpaper like always. Clara breezed past me, dragging her designer heels across the marble floor like she owned the house already. She didn't even glance in my direction. She whispered to her brother Edward. Is she still here? Apparently, Edward replied. But not for long. I'll be damned if I let a maid loiter in our home. Our home. That word, our, echoed in my head like a mocking bell. If only they knew. I had served that family through everything. I watched Evelyn lose her husband. I was there the day Clara came home from boarding school in tears, and I held her as she cried, until she realized it was me, the maid, and pulled away in disgust. I cleaned Edward's blood off the tile when he came home drunk and shattered a glass bottle. I stayed quiet through it all, because that's what good maids do. But Evelyn, she was different. She saw me. Not always in public, but at night when the others were gone or asleep, she would sit with me in the kitchen and sip tea. Sometimes I think you know this house better than I ever did, she once said. I didn't reply. I never knew if her kindness was real or just guilt. Then came the funeral, a garden ceremony, overdone and cold, with more designer handbags than condolences. I stood at the back, behind the last row of chairs, unnoticed. That is, until Clara turned around and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh look, even the maid made time to mourn, how sweet." There was laughter. I didn't flinch. I had become a master of silence. But inside something shifted. That night, after the guests were gone, I walked the halls alone. The house felt heavier, like it knew it had lost its soul. In Evelyn's bedroom, I went to tidy up, pure instinct. That's when I saw it, a sealed envelope. Tucked inside her top drawer, beneath a lavender sachet and an old photograph of her and me from years ago. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed with gold. To be opened upon my death, confidential, and it was addressed to me. My hands trembled. I sat down on the edge of her bed and stared at it. My heart was pounding. I had never taken anything from this house. Not a single coin, not a scrap of food beyond what I was allowed. But this was given to me. I didn't open it that night. I couldn't. Instead, I placed it in my apron and walked to the kitchen, where I sat in the dark until sunrise, listening to the old grandfather clock tick like a drum of fate. The next morning, Mr. Pembroke, the family lawyer, arrived for the reading of the will. Everyone gathered in the study. I stood quietly in the corner, as always, ready to be forgotten. Clara rolled her eyes the moment she saw me. Edward scoffed. "Why is she here?" Clara demanded. Mr. Pembroke didn't even look up. Because Mrs. Hawthorne wanted her here. Silence. The lawyer opened his folder, adjusted his glasses, and began. He read Evelyn's wishes in that calm, measured tone only lawyers and robots possess. Clara was named. So was Edward. A few sentimental items, her jewelry, a painting. Then he paused. His eyes flicked to me. "To Miss Elena Cruz," he said slowly, "I leave the Hawthorne estate in full." The room exploded. "What?" Clara shrieked. "That's ridiculous," Edward thundered, standing to his feet. "This must be a mistake." Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat. "The will is notarized, witnessed, and filed in accordance with state law. It is valid." Clara laughed hysterically. "She's the maid. She's not even. She can't. She doesn't deserve this." Edward pointed a trembling finger at me. "You manipulated her. You took advantage of her old age." I said nothing. My heart raced, but I stood still. Mr. Pembroke opened a second envelope, Evelyn's personal letter to me. I hadn't seen that one before. He read aloud. "Elena, you have been the true steward of this home. While my children sought only what they could take, you gave. You sacrificed. You held this family together long after it stopped deserving you. I leave you this house not as a reward, but as a recognition. You were never just the maid. You were the heart of this home. There was a long, choking silence. I looked at Clara and Edward then. For the first time they looked small, like children who had lost a game they assumed was rigged in their favor. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, but inside, something bloomed. Not revenge, but justice. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. They wouldn't go quietly. They never did. And as I stood there in that grand room, the will trembling in my hands, I realized something I never thought I would feel. Power. Real, undeniable power. But what would I do with it? What kind of owner would I become? Because now, the house was mine. And they had 30 days to leave. They called me just the maid. But they were about to learn who I really was. The next morning, I unlocked the front door, not with a housekeeper's passkey, but with the key of an owner. The air in the Hawthorne estate felt different, lighter, like the walls were exhaling after holding their breath for decades. Or maybe that was me. For 30 years, I tiptoed on those marble floors like I didn't belong. Now, every footstep echoed with purpose. But don't mistake that for peace. Ownership didn't feel like a crown, it felt like armor. Because I knew the war was coming, and it started sooner than I expected. I found Clara and Edward in the kitchen, still dressed in silk and entitlement, sipping from fine china they never bothered to wash. They looked at me like I had trespassed in their world. Edward leaned against the counter, arms folded. "So," he said coldly, "you're really going through with this farce?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked past them, calmly opened the cabinet, and retrieved the estate ledger, something only the staff ever touched. "You both have 30 days, I said, turning to them, "to vacate the premises." Clara choked on her tea. "You can't be serious. I'm following your mother's will, to the letter." Clara stormed forward, her voice rising. "My mother was confused. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing." She was clear," I cut in. My voice didn't shake. "Not anymore. She trusted me with this house. I suggest you start packing." And then, something I didn't expect. Clara laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not even a cruel one. It was the laugh of someone who thought she still held the strings. "Oh, Elena," she said with syrupy venom, "you think a will makes you family? You think you can just slide into our lives like some Cinderella fantasy?" She took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "You may have the deed, but you'll never have the name." She walked out, heels clicking like gunshots across the tile. Edward stayed behind, staring at me with something I couldn't quite place. Hate, pity, or fear? He said nothing, just nodded slightly and followed his sister. I should have felt victorious, but instead the loneliness hit me like a cold wind. For years, I was the ghost in the background. Now, I was the one haunting the house. That night, I wandered the estate, taking it all in, not as a maid, but as its owner. The grand chandelier in the foyer I used to polish every Thursday. The reading nook Evelyn loved still holding her last book. The portrait of her above the fireplace, watching me with eyes full of memory. In the study, I sat behind her desk. My desk, now, and I opened the second drawer. There it was again, the document that changed everything. The will. Signed, witnessed, irrefutable. And beside it, another envelope. This one, smaller, thinner, unmarked. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Evelyn's hand. But the words, they weren't about gratitude, they were instructions. "Elena," it began, "if you're reading this, then you already know what I've left you. But there is more. More than the house. More than the estate. There is a secret that must be protected." A secret? I kept reading. Evelyn spoke of a locked box, hidden in the west wing behind the old armoire we never moved. "You'll know it when you see it," she wrote. "What's inside belongs to you. But be warned, if Clara or Edward find it first, they'll use it to destroy everything I tried to preserve." My pulse quickened. I folded the letter and tucked it safely into my pocket. The west wing hadn't been used in years. That part of the house had always felt forgotten. Abandoned, even. That night, I made my way there. Dust hung in the air like fog. The air smelled like old wood and time. I reached the end of the hall and found it, the armoire Evelyn had written about. Heavy, ornate, unmoved for decades. I braced myself and pulled. It creaked, resisting at first, then slid aside. Behind it a recess in the wall, and inside, a small black box. Unlabeled, locked. I held it in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. Suddenly a noise, footsteps, not mine. I turned. Clara. She stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed. Looking for something? She asked. I froze. This house has secrets, she continued, slowly walking toward me, and I know for a fact that my mother didn't tell you all of them. I clutched the box tighter. What's in it? She asked. I said nothing. You think you've won, Clara hissed, stepping closer. But let me tell you something, Elena. Power doesn't come from papers, it comes from what you're willing to do to protect it. And with that, she turned and left, disappearing into the shadows like a warning. I stood alone in that dusty hallway, holding a locked box full of secrets and 1,000 questions. What was Evelyn trying to protect? What had she hidden from her children and from me? And most of all, what would I do if Clara tried to take it? This house, this legacy, it wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about truth. And truth has sharp teeth. They thought taking the estate was the end of the story. But the story was just beginning, because some legacies are written in stone, and others are sealed in locked boxes. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just a story about inheritance. It's about identity, power, and the cost of silence. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and come with me as we open the box and uncover the secret that could destroy us all. That night, I couldn't sleep. The black box sat on the nightstand beside me, silent, closed, and full of questions. I had turned the key Evelyn left in her letter over and over in my hand, but I still hadn't opened it. Something told me that whatever was inside would change everything. Not just my standing in the estate, not just my relationship with Clara and Edward, but who I was, who I'd always been, and who Evelyn knew I could become. Morning broke slowly over the estate, gray and uncertain, the kind of sky that seemed to whisper, "Brace yourself." I finally took the key, slid it into the lock, and opened the box. Inside were 3 things. First, a stack of old photographs, faded at the edges but still sharp enough to see the truth. Me, holding a baby. Evelyn, younger, looking down at us. And a man I didn't recognize, stern, suited, with eyes that looked too much like Edward's. Second, a birth certificate, not mine. The child in the photo, the baby I held, was listed under a different name, but the mother, listed as me. The father, unnamed. I felt the breath leave my chest. My hands trembled. And then, the third item, a handwritten letter, dated 26 years ago. Evelyn's handwriting. But this wasn't like the others. This wasn't formal. It was personal, emotional. "Elena, I failed you once. I won't fail you again." She went on to say that the man in the photo was her late husband, Gregory Hawthorne, the father of Clara and Edward. And the man who had taken advantage of me back when I was just a teenager cleaning the halls of the estate. I never told a soul. I buried it, just like I buried the pain of giving birth in secret and handing over my child to protect them from scandal. But Evelyn, she knew. She had known the entire time. And though she couldn't undo the past, she wrote that she spent her life trying to make it right. She took care of my son, gave him a life, an education, never letting on to anyone who his real mother was. My knees buckled. I sat there for hours, staring at those documents. My whole life, I thought I was just the help. But I was family. My child was part of this bloodline, and suddenly the inheritance made more sense. Evelyn wasn't just rewarding loyalty. She was returning what was mine by right. Later that afternoon, I heard the front doors slam. Clara, she was furious. She had found the drawer in the study open, knew I had taken something. She stormed into the sitting room where I stood, fists clenched. "What did you find, Elena? What are you hiding?" I held her gaze. "Truth," I said quietly. "Something you and Edward have been running from your entire lives." She narrowed her eyes. "You think this game makes you powerful? You think blackmail will keep you in this house?" I shook my head. "This isn't blackmail. It's history. It's blood. And it's coming to light whether you like it or not." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No one will believe you." "They don't have to," I replied, holding up the papers. "DNA speaks louder than scandal." And for the first time, I saw fear crack through her perfect mask. Because she knew the truth lived in those walls and that I had found it. Later that night, I sat alone in Evelyn's garden, holding one of the photos. My son, his name was Samuel. He had grown up thinking he was adopted by a friend of the family, never knowing the woman who tucked him in at night was the same one who gave birth to him. And I had stayed silent. Out of shame, out of protection, out of a belief that I wasn't worthy to claim him. Now I had the chance to rewrite everything. But the moment I thought I could finally rest, a storm hit, figuratively and literally. A knock on the front door, loud, urgent. I opened it to find Edward, wet from the rain, breathless, and scared. "They froze the accounts," he said. "What?" "Clara," he stammered, stepping inside. "She's panicking. She called the family lawyer, tried to challenge the will. He shut her down. Now she's gone rogue." He looked me dead in the eye. "She's trying to sell the summer home, off the books. She wants to cash out before you lock her out completely." I stared at him, trying to read between the lines. "Why are you telling me this?" He hesitated, then said something that surprised me. "Because maybe you're better for this house than we ever were." I didn't answer. I didn't trust it. Not yet, but I did know one thing. This wasn't about luxury anymore, or legacy. This was about truth, healing, justice. I had a son to find, a house to protect, and a final confrontation that I knew was coming. Because Clara wasn't done. She was just getting started, and the next move would be hers. I uncovered the truth in the walls, but now it's time to defend it. You'd think that once the truth comes out, the battle ends. That justice, once revealed, brings peace, but sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who've lost control. And Clara Hawthorne had just lost everything. I woke up the next morning to silence. Too quiet. Even for this estate, the staff were gone, vanished overnight, the security system disabled, and the landlines dead. Something was off. Then I noticed it, the doors to the late Evelyn's study ajar. Papers scattered like leaves on the wind. She'd been here. Clara, searching, desperate, hunting for anything she could twist into leverage. And that's when I knew her last move had already begun. By noon, a black car pulled into the drive. It wasn't Edward. It wasn't Samuel. It was them. Clara's lawyers, a pair of snakes in sharp suits. Cold eyes, clipboard smiles. "We're here to discuss rightful ownership of the estate," one of them said. I didn't flinch. I invited them in. Because I already knew the game. And this time, I wasn't playing defense. They handed me a document, an emergency injunction, a formal challenge to the will. Clara was arguing mental incompetence, that Evelyn had been unwell in her final months, unfit to make such a major decision. And behind that, a countersuit for fraud, claiming I had manipulated Evelyn, coerced her, forged signatures. The lies were thick, venomous, but I had the antidote. "I see," I said calmly. Then I handed them the folder Evelyn left me, the photos, the DNA results, the birth certificate. I watched their expressions shift as they flipped through the pages, stone melting into disbelief. "That's impossible," one of them whispered. I smiled softly. "Not impossible, just inconvenient. For Clara." The men left without another word, and within the hour the storm came. Not rain, but Clara herself. She burst into the foyer like a hurricane, fur coat soaked, fury carved into every feature. "You think this makes you one of us?" she hissed, standing inches from my face. "I'm not one of you," I replied, "and thank God for that." Her voice cracked, unhinged. "This house is mine. My name is carved into the gate. My blood built these walls." I looked her dead in the eyes, and my blood was spilled inside them. Silence. That's when Edward entered, quiet, hesitant. He had been gone all morning. And now, with a tired expression, he approached us both and said, simply, "It's over, Clara." She spun to face him. "You're siding with her? I'm siding with the truth." Then the moment I had dreaded and longed for all at once. The doorbell rang, and there he was. Samuel, my son, now a grown man, tall, composed, eyes that mirrored mine more than I ever realized. He stepped in slowly. His eyes took in the house, the tension, and finally, me. "Elena," he said softly. "You can call me Mom," I whispered. There were no tears at first, just the kind of silence that wraps around two people who have waited a lifetime to speak. Then he nodded and walked toward me. I opened my arms, and for the first time in 26 years, I held my son. But even in that moment, Clara wouldn't stop. "He's not part of this family," she snapped. "He's the product of a servant and a scandal." Edward's voice boomed through the room. "That's enough, Clara." And then Samuel turned to her. "If that's how you define family, then maybe this house doesn't deserve the name Hawthorne at all." Clara's face broke, mask cracked, fury spent, and she fled. Just like that. No crown, no victory. Just the echo of her heels down the marble hall. Days passed, the courts reviewed the evidence, the will stood, the estate was mine, but I didn't want the title, I didn't want revenge, I wanted purpose. I rehired the staff Clara had dismissed. Turned the West Wing into a community shelter for women in crisis. Donated the family's jewelry collection to fund scholarships for girls like me, once told they belonged in the shadows. And as for Samuel, he stayed. We began again, slowly, carefully, learning to become what we'd always been, deep down. Mother and son. And Edward? He left. Quietly. With a letter. He said he was going to travel, see the world his mother had always told him about, but he never cared to explore. And for the first time he called me something I never expected to hear. Thank you, Aunt Elena. I still walk the garden sometimes, still tend the roses Evelyn once cared for. She believed in redemption, in truth, in the idea that a title means nothing, if your heart is empty. I was just the maid. But that was never the whole truth. I was the protector, the witness, the mother, the survivor, and now I am the legacy. Thank you for joining me on this unforgettable journey. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice, redemption, and the quiet strength of those written off too soon, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Because sometimes the greatest power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from truth and the courage to stand in it. See you in the next story.